Today, we're going to take a really deep look at the engine that powers almost all life on Earth, photosynthesis. But this isn't going to be your standard high school biology lesson. Think of it more like a detective story. A story about how scientists try to build models of this incredibly vital process and what happens when one of those models reveals a surprising flaw in how we thought things worked.
And it all kicks off with a really simple, almost kind of baffling question. Imagine you're looking at a tree branch. You've got two leaves right next to each other on the exact same branch, but one is photosynthesizing like crazy, just going at full capacity, while the other one is barely doing anything. How is that even possible? This little mystery, it's actually at the heart of a massive challenge for scientists. And that brings us to what we can call the photosynthesis puzzle. See, the goal is to create a single mathematical model. One set of rules that can predict the rate of photosynthesis. The problem is, that rate is never the same. It changes constantly depending on how much light there is, the CO2 in the air, the season, the species of the plant, and like we just saw, it can even be different from one leaf to the next. For decades, the go-to tool for tackling this puzzle has been something called the Farquhar model. It's been the scientific standard for a long time, and it's built on a really clever idea for trying to cut through all that messiness and complexity. The model works on this simple but really powerful idea. At any single moment, a plant's photosynthesis isn't being limited by a dozen different things at once. Nope. It's only being held back by one thing. It's either limited by the amount of CO2 it can get its hands on, or it's limited by the amount of light it can capture. The actual rate of photosynthesis, it's simply the slower of those two. It's just like a factory assembly line, right? Your total output is always controlled by your slowest station. It's a bottleneck.
So this model, it's elegant, it's simple, it makes a lot of sense. But what happens when you take it out of the nice, clean world of the textbook and you throw messy, complicated, real-world data at it? I'm talking data from tons of different species across all the seasons with all that weird leaf-to-leaf variation mixed in.
Let's just ask that question head-on. If we take all this data, lump it all together, and try to fit it using that one-size-fits-all Farquhar model, what does it look like? Does the model actually hold up?
Well, the answer, in the actual words of the researcher who did this, is that you get a whole lot of scatter. Basically, the predictions are all over the map. The data points look like you just threw them at the chart. That elegant, simple model starts to look pretty clumsy when it's face-to-face with the true complexity of nature.
And here's the core of the problem. When you look closely, the standard model predicts a maximum rate of photosynthesis that is way below what scientists were actually seeing in the real world. So it's not just a little inaccurate, it's fundamentally underestimating what these plants are capable of. The model isn't just creaking, it's broken.
Okay, so if your simple model fails, what's the solution? Well, you don't give up, you build a smarter model. And this is where a really powerful statistical approach called a hierarchical model comes into the story. It's a pretty cool concept. It's basically a model within a model. Before we get all technical, let's think about it like this. The standard model is kind of like having one single cookie recipe that you try to use for everything. Chocolate chip, oatmeal, peanut butter. The results are going to be a mess, right? A hierarchical model, on the other hand, is like having a master cookie recipe, but with specific, built-in adjustments for each different type of cookie you want to make. And that's pretty much exactly what a hierarchical model is. You still use the core ideas from the Farquhar model, but its key numbers, like that maximum rate of photosynthesis we talked about, they're not fixed anymore. Instead, those numbers are allowed to change, and they're predicted by a whole second model that takes into account all those real-world factors causing the variation in the first place. So this new, smarter approach splits all that variation into two buckets. First, you have fixed effects. These are the predictable things we can actually go out and measure, like how much nitrogen is in a leaf, or what month of the year it is. But then, and this is the brilliant part, it adds random effects. This is a category that just soaks up all that other unpredictable, leaf-to-leaf weirdness that we can't easily explain. And here's where the story gets really, really good. This new model didn't just fit the data better. I mean, it did, but that's not the punchline. By properly accounting for all that variability, it actually uncovered a flaw in a long-held assumption about how plants work. And the results are just striking. On the left, you see the old model's scattered mess. And on the right, the hierarchical model's predictions line up almost perfectly with what was actually observed.
It successfully captures the entire range of behavior, from the laziest leaves to the absolute photosynthetic superstars. The model just works.
And because it works so well, we can finally trust what it's telling us. And this is the bombshell discovery. The model showed that the relationship between something like leaf nitrogen and photosynthesis is totally different if you're looking at leaves within a single species versus comparing the averages of many different species. The rules literally change depending on the scale you're looking at.
So here's exactly what the model found. If you look within just one species, there's a pretty consistent but relatively shallow relationship between nitrogen and photosynthesis. But when you lump all the species together and analyze them, you get a much steeper and very different relationship. The huge mistake scientists were making was applying that steep across all species rule to predict what was happening inside individual plants.
So why does all this matter so much? Well, it means that for years, a lot of ecological models were using the wrong set of rules. It's kind of like using the rules for running a marathon to predict how fast someone can run a 100-meter dash. This finding corrected a really widespread error and showed that how we decide to model complexity isn't just some nerdy statistical detail. It's absolutely fundamental to getting the science right and truly understanding the engine that powers our entire planet. And that leaves us with a fascinating final thought to chew on. This whole story was about photosynthesis, one of the most studied processes in all of biology. So it really makes you wonder, what other established scientific rules out there might just be an illusion, a misunderstanding that was created simply because we were looking at the data in the wrong way?